In this episode of Shutter Nonsense, Jeffrey and I dive into the ever-evolving question, does gear still matter, especially in 2025? We chat about brand loyalty, real-world benefits of upgrading, and whether new tech actually improves your photos or just makes things easier. We also address the wrong reasons to consider an upgrade to your kit, an all-too-common trap for us photographers. As always, join us on Patreon, free or paid, for post-show discussions and to share your thoughts. Let's get into it. All right, everybody, welcome to yet another episode of Shutter Nonsense. Before we get into it, Jeffrey, I've got a beef to pick.
Uh-oh.
I'm still mad.
Is it my fault?
I'm still mad at you.
Uh-oh. Are we back to your dreams again?
I don't know. Are we? If you want to just abandon me.
You got to tell the story, though.
No, we're just going to leave it at that.
You've got to tell the story.
If you want to just abandon me in the middle of the podcast episode, like, I'm done. I can't do this. I need to take an indefinite break. And I'm sitting there, for anybody that knows the movie Wayne's World, when Wayne gets fired and Garth standing on stage. I can't do this by myself. So, yeah, waking up in the middle of the night and then trying to figure out if that was reality or a dream. So I keep having to remind my self-conscious or my subconscious self that you don't need to be mad at Jeffrey. So
yep, I think it was all the subconscious of not posting that episode 9 in a timely manner that did it. It was very much bothering you, and it manifested in your dreams.
Speaking of that, the ironic part this morning is I went into Wix to update the summary notes from that, and Wix is having issues, so I wasn't actually able to do it. So all your hard work yesterday afternoon was for naught, except that it's all
good. It needed to be done. I scheduled this.
Good.
I was going to say, because I scheduled a social post already for the Patreon release, assuming you would get that done in time as well.
Yes. So yeah, I'll try not to randomly get upset with you in the midst of this. This is my subconscious. It trickles up to my frontal lobe, or I don't know. I'm not a brain surgeon. I don't know how this stuff works. So anyways, what you been up to?
So let's see. What have I been up to besides posting podcast episodes late?
Late.
I am getting ready for an art fair. I do one art fair a year, though I'm considering doing more. But I'm redoing what I show. So I've been getting some prints done and matting some prints and getting some accessories and things like that. So, like I said, shifting what I show a little bit back to a more local focus and taking a different approach. So a lot of it's been getting some photos printed. I got some sample medals printed, which should show up next week. If my mom is listening, I'm finally doing greeting cards this year, which I never have done. And I have an aunt and my mom both have always said, you got to start selling greeting cards. So this year there will be greeting cards. I expect to just kill it with those greeting cards. So
you better,
we'll see how that goes.
Else you're going to be mad at your mom and your aunt.
Exactly. So,
I can see them doing okay in an art fair. I would never put them up like on my website or something.
Yeah. For the art fair that I'm at, it's a lot of crafty stuff, so lower cost is a good thing. Yeah. So I think they have a point, and this is the year I'm going to try it. I've ignored them for 3 years or so about the greeting cards, and this is the year I'm trying it. So we'll do an update after that. But that's where a lot of my time has been, is getting ready for art fair, making sure I have the prints I want and the supplies coming in for that. So
yeah, Heather used to harp on me about doing postcards. I was like,
it's tough.
It's such a low price point. Like the volume you'd have to sell to make it any way, shape, or form a worthwhile endeavor. Plus, I don't really. I know it's ego. It's total ego, but like I don't want my work being presented on a postcard per se. Like whatever. It's not like I would make a ton of money off of it when they're selling for like $1, but it's kind of that pretentious, like, but it's my art, it's not a postcard. Pinky out. Yep.
So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I'll report back and see how the strategy works. It's like I said, I do one art fair a year. Like I'm considering expanding next year into more, but I always try to play with what I display, how I display it, just to learn a few things. Sure. So the greeting cards are the big thing this year. So.
Well, I've got some shocking news.
What have you been up to?
I've got shocking news, my friend. Besides being mad at you, I actually edited some photos 2 days ago.
I was going to ask, did you get to, is it Colorado?
No, it's Smokies. I decided to go back to that. Awesome. The not ironic thing, but it wasn't like a start to finish edit. I just went back to the photos I'd already worked on and like revisited them with fresh eyes. So it was mainly just tweaking some some edits from the Smokies. Hoping this weekend to get in there and actually start fresh on a few. I got some focus stacks I got to put together too, which, although, man, even though the software with Helicon Focus makes it so easy, it's still just like, ugh, I don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
So I always put those off towards the very end. So, but yeah, I actually opened up Lightroom and used it for its intended purpose for a change. So that was nice. Other than that, just getting back on the podcast train like you, trying to build up that cushion again, since we know we're going to have some periods coming up here with your travel and my travel and my wedding and holidays where we're not going to be able to record weekly like we have been. So just get that built up so we got that cushion. What else was I doing? Oh, I mentioned in last week's episode the mobile app I'm working on. So I was a little trepidatious about it at the time because it's the first time I've ever done anything like this. And I think I mentioned I'm using an AI tool, just natural language prompts to build it out. And it's doing really well, but going into it, I had no clue what I was doing. And I got to a point where I'm pretty confident that I had such a tangled spider web and ball of yarn in the back end from, I want to do this. No, wait, undo that and do this instead. And it was getting a lot of errors in that. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to start over, kind of taking the lessons learned over the last few weeks. And the new version is going much, much smoother. I actually feel like I'm probably awesome. I don't know, it's one of those things, kind of like the podcast, right? You get into it like, oh, it's not that much. And then, oh, wait, no, I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to do this, and this. But I feel like maybe I'm like 75% of the way there, almost to the point where I might send it maybe to you and some other folks for some kicking of the tires. So I would hope by the time this episode comes out at the end of October that it's hopefully up in the app stores. That's the next thing I got to figure out is like how all that works. I know I've got to pay for a developer account and all that nonsense. And of course, Apple being Apple, it's more expensive than on Android. But we'll figure that out. But I'm feeling good about it. I'm looking at it as it's a tool that I would find helpful. So hopefully others will as well. So I said, hopefully it is out by this point. If not, I must have hit a pretty big stumbling block. So.
Well, if you have a test build ready coming up by fall, I've got a couple trips I can use it for and play with it and see how it goes. So.
Yeah, if nothing else, I can share it's a web link that you can just load in your browser and play with it.
Perfect.
But yeah, anyways, chipping away at that. I feel like that's been the bulk of it. I'm a little behind on some admin stuff, so I got to dig away at that stuff too. But yeah, nothing terribly exciting. Probably the app is the most exciting. And then my box set, which again, this is more than 3 months off. No, 2 months, 2.5 months off track, so to speak, from recording to when this will go live. But the box set is officially out for sale now. So see if I can spur some additional interest in that. Pre-orders didn't go the greatest as I would have liked with the enhanced offering with the additional prints in it. But we'll see. Again, I've done a pretty lousy job of... it's always that fine line of promoting it to make people aware versus worrying that you're just driving people nuts with pushing it. So
push way more than you think.
Yep. Yeah. And I haven't done a good job of that. So anyways, so that's out there too. Let's get to the topic. So at first blush, we'll just address the elephant in the room. Jeffrey and I were joking before we hit record that, looking at the topic of do gear and brands really matter? Our initial thought is, nope, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Exactly. Shortest episode ever.
Yeah, but thankfully, again, we refer to our assistant, Chad GPT, not Chat GPT, Chad GPT. He's Italian. Anyways, coming up with actually some pretty good kind of guiding questions and thought-provoking questions to kind of help us guide this direction. So if you're thinking this may not be an episode you're interested in, I think hopefully we can tease out some relevance for everybody, whether you're a beginner or maybe somebody more in the middle, maybe you're on the cusp of thinking you need to upgrade, so on and so forth. So I think, just jumping into it from kind of a first segment standpoint, and this might be a little bit more structured, but it's us and it's Shutter Nonsense, so we'll probably go off on plenty of tangents, but it's broken into segments here. So the first segment would be, do brands really matter? And I think that's the easiest one to say. In 2025, I'm inclined to say no.
Yeah.
And I've felt this way for quite a while, other than when the transition to mirrorless first began, and Sony was the clear leader in terms of the mirrorless shift and really advancing image quality in terms of noise and video and things like that. Other than that kind of transitory period, I think it's been for a long time, even I'm sure going back to the DSLR days, which I didn't shoot real long with the old school non-mirrorless, but I'm sure a lot of the arguments for or against one brand or the other, just like anything these days and with the internet age and social media, were blown greatly out of proportion. But yeah, and I sense from your response just initially, Jeffrey, that you're on board with this too. Like whether it's Nikon or Sony or Canon, obviously those are going to be the three biggest. Those will probably be the ones we discuss most on this episode. But then you've got Fuji with not just their medium format, but what are they? They're not full frame.
The APS-C stuff.
Yeah, APS-C. Olympus has got some good options, and there's things to factor in too in terms of weight and size and space concerns and things like that. So anyways, yeah, I think comparing, it's less apples to oranges these days and more apples to apples. Technology has gotten to a point where you're going to be able to make good photos with pretty much any camera that's out there. I don't know, I'll take a pause here while I look down at the notes if you want to interject anything from that standpoint, Jeffrey. But
yeah, I mean, really super similar lines of thought. The only time I felt like there's a big difference in camera brands was those early mirrorless days. I mean, that was the only point. I shoot Nikon because it's what's comfortable to me. But that was the only point where I was like, should I switch brands? Because there was a phase where Sony, killer autofocus, great mirror, like they were leading the pack for sure. Even Nikon's early releases, the Z6, Z7, weren't really on par with a Sony camera at the time. And I passed, and that's when I was really like, should I move to Sony? Is Nikon ever going to catch up? And then when they released their Mark IIs, they started to catch up, and now I think Canon might have gone through a very similar thing that first year or two, a little rough. But that's the only time. Now, my advice to anyone looking for a camera is less go get a Nikon or go get a Canon, go get a Sony. It's more like go to your local camera store, pick it up, and see how it feels in your hand. Because to me, camera's a tool, and technically they're so similar these days. Go with the one that feels good to pick up, feels good where the buttons are, and everything like that. And that, to me, has a bigger difference of any modern camera than this brand or that brand. And
I mean,
what I like is slightly different than you. You're a Canon shooter. I assume it feels super natural and good to you in your hand. So
yeah, and to your point, like I think that's great advice, and that's been advice that's been around for years. Is if you're not sure, go somewhere and touch them and feel them and hold them. You know, I've always found Sonys to not be as comfortable to hold. Nikon and Canon, I think, are still the kind of category leaders in that regard. But in terms of image quality, for the most part, in terms of functionality, you're going to be pretty much apples to apples these days. I would say one area also to look at, not just how they feel in the hand, but also look at the menu systems and play around with that if you've got an opportunity. See, you know, like for me, I went from Canon DSLR to Canon mirrorless. So it was a very natural transition in terms of button layout for the most part, although I went with the first EOS R mirrorless camera, which had some odd, not the user interface, but the button layout and stuff, and missing dials. They made some odd decisions with that first one that never really worked all that great, I felt. But in terms of like the menus and then all that stuff, you already kind of know where everything is, because I went from Canon to Canon or Nikon to Nikon or what have you, going, you know, just like helping somebody on a workshop and they've got a Nikon or a Sony, and you know, it's kind of a foreign land when you go into some of those menus and you're trying to remember where things are at and everything like that. But so definitely consider that as well. But otherwise, like just looking at the question on the sheet here in terms of do camera brands have a meaningful difference that impacts your creative output, I would say absolutely not. And we kind of touched on this. Might have been an episode with Murray, maybe best to start off with Lightroom versus diving into the deep end with Photoshop, is with camera gear too, unless there's something truly preventing you from getting the shots you want, there's probably not a great argument for upgrading. And backing up on that, I would say I started off with a Canon T5i, which is relatively entry level, kind of like they're one step up from basic Canon Rebel. entry-level camera, crop sensor. When I first decided to upgrade it, I went to a Canon 80D. And my main driver for that is I was wanting to get into astro. Now, I should have gone full frame, but I was trying to be conscious, blah, blah, blah. But anyways, there was an actual technical limitation of that T5i. There was no way I was going to be able to do effective night sky photography with it. The 80D, even though it was crop, it did decently well with it. Not as good as what I could have gotten with a full frame, but it was at least a significant leap forward and was something I could use to learn the ropes of the astrophotography side of the equation, so to speak. So that would be the one thing, like kind of prefacing all of this conversation with is, again, if you're on the cusp of thinking you need to upgrade or you want to upgrade, really challenging yourself and asking the question of, okay, well, what am I going to be able to do better, or how is my creativity going to be easier to embrace or achieve by spending the money on an upgrade, whether it's a lens or especially the camera bodies, where at the end of the day, like if your compositional skills aren't really up to snuff yet, then maybe upgrading isn't quite ready or isn't quite the logical step to take. Practice on the soft skills before you go with the hard hardware and spending the money on that stuff.
Yep.
The next question on here is around brand ecosystems, which I do think that's something to consider right now, at least. And we've kind of seen this with the shift into mirrorless, and I'm a Canon shooter. I love my Canon equipment. However, the big glaring issue with Canon since they went mirrorless is they have yet to open up to third-party lens manufacturers, at least in terms of autofocus lenses. There's some manual focus lenses out there. But I can't go out today and buy a Tamron RF mount lens for my mirrorless Canon cameras or Sigma or whatever brand might be out there, which to me, somebody that came up, and we talked about this in the What's in Our Bag episode, I started off, and all of my glass for the most part was third-party glass. Because again, starting out, I didn't necessarily want to make this huge investment in an ecosystem that at the time, I wasn't entirely sure. Like, I was to a point where I wanted to upgrade because there were some limitations I was bumping up against, but I still wasn't like, oh, this is going to be a future career or anything like that. So Canon today, like, you're roped into, if you're going to go with a Canon mirrorless body, you're stuck with Canon glass. Now, you can at least adapt the older Canon lenses and even third-party Canon lenses from Tamron, Sigma, what have you, for the EF mount onto the RF cameras. And in my experience, that adapter works really well. Occasional hiccups here and there, but pretty rare. But to me, that's the biggest red mark against Canon right now. And supposedly they are starting to work on licensing with, it was either Tamron or Sigma, I can't remember who, but like, I don't know if there's even a timeline yet for when we'll see anything about that. The flip side of the coin, and neither of us are Sony shooters, but Sony, when they went mirrorless, like, they embraced all the third-party glass options out there. And for a while, and less so now, but again, Canon, you're still going to be stuck very much in the Canon ecosystem. But for a while, like, if you wanted the option of pretty much any kind of lens you wanted and you wanted mirrorless, you're going to have to go with Sony. Again, that gap is closed, and Nikon is open to third-party lenses, right, on their mirrorless?
Yeah, they do a lot with Tamron. Yeah. Tamron has several third-party lenses. They're controlling it to a degree, I believe, but they strike me as the middle ground as to what third-party lenses work, and they seem to be working pretty well with Tamron, because I've actually shot a couple third-party Tamron lenses, either that I owned or that I rented to try out to see how it compared to some Nikon lenses. So, yeah, there are some third-party options. But I do think you're right, that's if you're talking physical hardware, those lens options are third-party lenses available. Could be a consideration if you're looking to make a big jump. Yeah,
it's cost is the factor. Like the Canon glass, their lenses are phenomenal, especially when you get into their L series of lenses. But there's also, just like any manufacturer, there's the premium price you're going to pay for the first-party glass versus going with somebody like a Tamron or Sigma or another third-party manufacturer that's out there. And with Nikon, their partnership with Tamron, isn't it that some of the Nikon lenses are actually developed by Tamron, or do I have that backwards?
That is my understanding, and I can't remember which lens they did that with or which lenses they did that with. But yes, that's my understanding that some of the actual Nikon are actually Tamron built them and made them,
Right.
and even though they've got the Nikon name on it, and I can't remember the specific ones, but yes, that sounds like something they've been doing.
Which I know that kind of rubs some people the wrong way a little bit too. Like, oh, why are you putting a Nikon branding, a Nikon price tag on something made by somebody besides Nikon? But again, we talked about it in episode 2, but some of the Tamron lenses I had, when you got into the nitty gritty of them, had better image quality and some other features than even the first party brands. So
I've shot.
It's not like the old days where some of those third parties were junk.
Even in my portrait days, I still have my Tamron 24 to 70 2.8 and 70 to 200 2.8, and I have them adapted to use with the mirrorless now. But I mean, when I bought those, I rented both lenses to see which was, and that Tamron lens was super good. So
I've still got my. I can't hidden behind the candle. I'm being bougie today with a candle going, but that's my Tamron 24 to 70 2.8 and the 70 to 200 2.8s back there. I'm probably going to be selling the 70 to 200 off to MPB or somewhere, because I just haven't used it in like 2 years. Even the 24 to 70, the only reason I'm keeping it is for if I want a higher quality in studio video, but otherwise I'm using my GGI Pocket for everything. But anywho's, I would say, aside from the camera bodies, that lens ecosystem is going to be a big determining factor for somebody just starting out, or maybe, again, you are looking at going from non-mirrorless to mirrorless, although generally speaking, you probably are just going to want to stay in the same ecosystem anyways, because you're going to be able to, with Canon and Nikon, you're going to be able to adapt your lenses and save a heck of a lot of money. And that's what I did. And over the course of time, I just gradually upgraded to the Canon RF mount lenses, so that I didn't have to deal with the adapters or anything anymore. So, the lens ecosystem, I think, is a biggie. I mean, just looking at the next one here, like, how much does brand identity or marketing influence perception in the photography world? The note I jotted down was too much.
It's like the social media world, right? Like, it's all Canon, Nikon, Potato, all those. I take it all in good-natured fun, but I do think there's a whole set of people out there that, like, if you're not shooting X camera brand, you're doing it wrong, and I don't understand that approach, but it exists. That's for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll poke fun at you Nikon shooters on the Discord we're in, or Sony or what have you. And believe it or not, Jennifer Renwick, I'm not serious about it. I'm not fanning the camera wars, if you're listening to this, since you chided me one time. But I like to have fun with it, but it's just silly, stupid fun. Like, if I had to switch to Nikon tomorrow or Sony tomorrow, I don't think it would impact my ability to create a compelling photo in any way, shape, or form, other than just getting used to the layout and everything like that. So not a huge topic. We need to delve into that. But I think, a lot of people are way, way too hung up. I would argue that a lot of people that have far too much time on their hands and, are quote unquote keyboard warriors that go into these forums and want to argue about why Canon is the best or Nikon's the best or whatever silly little thing they want to waste their time on.
Agreed.
So let's shift to segment 2 and that upgrade mentality that we kind of referenced.
Are we shifting gears?
No. I want to make it clear to Matt Payne's lawyers, we are not shifting gears. If you want to sue anybody, Jeffrey, use the term first. Anyways, the upgrade mentality, and we already talked about, like, really think through what is this going to truly provide you besides the look and feel and smell of a nice new shiny piece of technology, which, hey, especially in my younger years, I was all about that. Like, I just wanted to buy a new stereo or a new CD player or something just because it was new and shiny and it was cool. But then that hedonistic treadmill kicks in and kind of realize that you wasted your money a little bit. So anyways, the question to kind of delve into here is, are most photographers motivated by a true need to upgrade, or is it FOMO, or fear of missing out? Obviously, we can't put ourselves in anybody else's headspace, but I would say a lot of it is fear of missing out, but probably driven by social media and, let's be realistic, marketing, because these companies wouldn't be doing their jobs if they weren't effectively trying to market you and encourage you to upgrade, even though you may not necessarily need to. But I think a lot of it, and even for me, going from like the original Canon R, and then I upgraded to the R5 I'm not going to bother with the year because I can't remember now, but I didn't really need to do that. The R is, in my opinion, it was a fantastic entry to the mirrorless market for Canon. The biggest knock against it was basically a 5D Mark IV, just converted into a mirrorless setup. But for me, going from a crop sensor to that, it was fantastic. And I didn't feel too terribly much that I was limited in terms of hitting a technical, what am I trying to say? A technical ceiling or anything like that. And
right, like a blocker,
right, like,
or like that.
I want to do this, and I just can't. I'm trying to think back to why. Actually, there were a couple things that I was like, man, why did I upgrade? Am I breaking my own advice here when I upgraded? But the biggest thing was probably the lack of in-body or automated focus stacking, which always ticked me off with Canon. They added it to the Canon RP, which was a lower level, like entry level mirrorless camera, but then they never added it to the R. So you've got a higher end camera without the same feature. It always bugged me, and I hate manually focus stacking. So that was one reason for me to consider upgrading to the R5. The R5 also has a tremendously better electronic viewfinder, totally different experience. And when I was shooting, when I had my R as my backup camera before I got my second R5, it was always really jarring to switch from the R5 back to the R and realize, like, oh my gosh, this EVF is like slow and not as clear and things like that. So not that was necessarily a technical limitation directly, but it would...
Right. There's nice to have with the gear, right? Like, there's these improvements that did it make a difference in your photography? Probably not. But as a convenience, efficiency, life type improvement, I think there's lots of those that exist. And that sounds like a good description of one where, did the old EVF work for you? Yes. Do you, now that you've seen the difference, is it, I like this one better? Yes.
Yeah, and could I have manually focus stacked? Sure. Is it phenomenally awesome to have automated focus stacking? Absolutely. I mean, neither of those features could I point at and say, oh, well, they made a huge difference in my photography. But what they did do was remove a hurdle. And again, I can't remember if it was in that What's in Our Bag episode where one of the episodes we talked about eliminating those gear-related hurdles that take you out of that flow state of mind, that creative state of mind, and make you go, okay, now I got to do this manual focus stack. So I need to think through. I need to make sure I focus there, and there, and go through it step by step. And also, if it's fleeting light and you're having to manually focus stacking, there's a possibility maybe you're not going to quite catch the light that you're going for. In terms of, again, the example I gave of the EVF being tremendously better in the R5 versus the R, I would argue that it's easier for me to compose in low light, or if I'm moving the camera around really quickly, because I am trying to catch a moment that's not going to last real long, and I'm getting better clarity in the EVF as I'm moving the camera and panning the camera about. I might be able to get a shot that maybe I would have missed otherwise. And again, B, it's just one less thing to pull me out of the act of just what I'm seeing and trying to make the photo of. So there's certainly valid technical reasons. There's almost always going to be a valid technical reason for most people, but I do think a lot of people, too, get trapped in that FOMO, especially around things like burst rates and stuff like that. Like, do you shoot wildlife?
Like no. It's not, right. And like you said, it's some of these improvements are efficiency, but it's not keeping you. It's not holding you back. Like the manual focus stack versus automatic focus stack. You can totally get that same image with the camera. You would have had to manually focus stack it. There's nothing that would have kept you from that image. Now, it's that ease of convenience. One of my upgrades was from a Z6 to a Z7 to. Which has more megapixel, and I'm the last to get into megapixel debates because, frankly, the Z6 II, which is a 24 megapixel camera, it does great. And if you watch your composition and don't do much cropping, there's really not much you can't do with it. The 45 megapixel for me, I am a sort of a habitual cropper, so it made it so I could crop a little more and stuff like that. But again, there's nothing I can do with my Z7 II per se if I'm careful with my compositions and shoot with intent that my Z6 II wasn't able to pull off. So it's like I didn't have to upgrade to the Z7 II. The workaround was pay attention to your compositions and don't assume you're going to be able to make a big crop. Do I like being able to crop a little more? Does it make my life a little easier in the field? Yes, but it wasn't holding my photography back by any means.
Yeah, and same for me, like going from the R, which is 30 megapixels, to the R5, which is 45. That was certainly, again, another multiple little pieces that kind of added up to a bigger reason for me. But like you, I don't do a ton of cropping. I especially these days, now that I've got the geared head and everything on my tripod, I find that I've got it dialed in the field and framed correctly. Might do a little tweak, but nothing that going from 30 to 45 megapixels would really make a difference on. You could also argue that with megapixels these days, with the advancements of upscaling, whether it be Adobe's super resolution or just I think people dismiss the ability of Lightroom and Photoshop and just the basic upscaling tools. They actually do pretty well. And you've got things like Topaz Gigapixel. That software option is a heck of a lot cheaper than going out and buying a new camera that cost a few $1,000 in terms of wanting to crop a little bit more, but still be able to print big or whatever. So yeah, the megapixel piece, I'm trying to think of what else spurred me on the R5 to upgrade. I know there were some other aspects of it, but probably the focus stacking was a big driver. Oh, well, and then obviously too, again, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, this is holding me back or it's impacting my creative vision, but the dynamic range is stronger on the R5 versus the R. Although, again, I maintain the R was really impressive. There's some shots I have where you're looking at basically black tones in the raw file, and then you get really good, clean detail out of it. But again, a lot of little things that kind of led to how can this make it easier in the field, make it easier in post, maybe get a little better result in post. Again, you've got AI denoising tools now that maybe you could argue would diminish the value of the upgrade from an older sensor to a newer sensor. But so there's all kinds of angles to look at. But I do think a lot of it, especially if you hang out in photography forums, I think the Landscape Photographers Worldwide Discord that we're in is a little immune to the whole FOMO thing. But if you're in more of like
if you go to Reddit,
Reddit
and hang out
or
in one of those photography subreddits or
comments or whatever, like there's going to be people left and right talking about how you can't make a good photo with an older camera or what have you, and it's a pretty ridiculous argument. So try to stay off that spending money treadmill and avoid the fear of missing out impulse to upgrade. Look at it in terms of what am I really being held back? What am I not able to do today that I know if I upgrade I will be able to do, or it'll remove a hurdle or what have you. I think we've already well touched on this, but again, do you think better gear actually leads to better photos or just easier execution? It can be a mix of both, right? Again, cleaner output and things like that, higher ISO with cleaner files coming out of the camera. But again, removing those technical limitations that aren't impacting the image quality per se, but again, that flow state of mind where you're having to maybe do a little bit more thinking in the field. Not that that's bad, but again.
And I feel like there is an element of larger jumps in technology that do have some technical, to your point, the noise and ISO ranges and how effective is it with various ISOs. I mean, if you go like the initial Z6 release of the Nikon mirrorless to like a Z6 III or Z8 or something like that, that leap, you're probably going to see something that's noticeable through actual usage, whereas a Z6 II to a Z6 III on specs in the lab, yes, Z6 III can actually it doesn't do as good a dynamic range as the Z6 II, but whatever you're comparing, there is something that on a lab environment, it looks better, but in real actual use, you're not. It's you can't even tell. So I guess what my point is, those smaller incremental upgrades where they're always trying to get, you've already got the current camera, next week they release the new version, like the odds of that camera actually technically doing something that you can't do, it's like, it's just that gap is just not nearly as large as maybe if you're a DSLR somewhere and trying to make the jump to mirrorless or a first iteration mirrorless to what's currently available now. Those incremental ones I just think we can argue about it in comments and the lab values, but real life usage, I don't think so.
No, that's a great point. And before I get into kind of carrying on what you just mentioned there, I'm going to apologize to our audience for Jeffrey banging on his desk so many times in that last little rant.
Am I banging on my desk? Sorry, I was excited. Michael, you'll have to clean those up.
I can't get those out.
I didn't even know I was banging
Oh,
on my desk.
you were going at it, man. It was Morse code. Anyways, no, that's a great point you raised that actually isn't on our prep notes, is real world environments and use cases versus somebody photographing a chart and zooming in at 400% to compare the sharpness of this lens versus that lens, or this, the noise performance of this camera sensor versus that camera sensor. Man, I'm not going to bang my desk, but that stuff is ridiculous 99% of the time. It is so far beyond the pale of anything that you would ever encounter or have to worry about in a real world environment. But I see people, and I did it too early on. I would sit there and look at those charts and go, ooh, this is just a little bit sharper. And, look at that, look at this. Yep. And you go down these rabbit holes. But at the end of the day, it's not going to impact your ability to make a creative or beautiful photo. And it's not going to really matter in the end either. Like, does Sony and Nikon maybe have a little better noise performance these days than Canon when you get into the higher ISOs? Sure. If I look at the lab details, maybe. I haven't looked at them in a while, but that was the case early on, at least in the mirrorless environment. Does it matter in the real world? Probably not one little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. And that goes to,
totally
we've discussed it in past episodes, but the propensity of pixel peeping and everything, and people getting carried away with that. And what I think, and again, I believe I've mentioned it before, but making that jump for you and me both, going from 30 megapixels to 45 megapixels, when I would zoom into 100% on a file from my EOS R versus zooming into 100% on a file with my R5, it's not apples to apples there because of the pixel count. So if I'm zooming to 100% on an R5 file, it's the equivalent of me zooming to 150% on an R file, which is insane. So there are reasons you would want to zoom to 100%, like to truly gauge your sharpening edges and things like that. But in terms of like editing finer details, there's really not much reason to be zooming into 100% if you're shooting with one of these higher megapixel bodies. Because if you look like in Lightroom in the upper left corner of the panel over there, you've got the little navigator view, and it shows you what area of the image you zoomed into. And it's like this little tiny bitty square now on these bigger megapixel files. Like, ain't nobody going to be looking at it like that. And plus, again, like we talked about in the printing episode, 99.999% of people are going to be looking at it on social media anyways. So
exactly,
that's one area I think people get way too hung up on is the pixel peeping. But going back to your point about the lab results and testing and sensor scores and corner sharpness and all this kind of nonsense stuff. Yeah, it's valid to a point, but it goes way too far. And it's not going to really matter at the end of the day when you're out shooting.
My YouTube reviews, I used to do more comparison stuff, and like I would photograph against a wall because I wasn't really into the chart thing, but I would go photograph against a wall and I'd match them and compare them, and I'd do whole videos on it. And I eventually realized at the end of the day, I can look at this and compare and say something, but I think what most people are concerned about, at least for me, how's it perform in the field? And so all my recent review videos tend to be more about, I try a new lens or something. Like I said, I'll rent a lens occasionally to try it out, but I've stopped doing let's photograph it at these focal lengths and these apertures, and let's just take it out. Let's use it. Let's look at the images, how you would normally consume them, and how do I feel about it. And I know that's not for everybody, and they want those charts, and I always say in my videos, there's charts out there, and those people do it better than I'm ever going to do, but I'm going to talk about how it performed for me in the field and go from there. So I'm glad I'm not alone.
You're not taping a dollar bill to the wall and zooming into the corners at 600%.
No, not anymore. No. Yes, I used to. Like I said, I used to do that because I thought that's what people wanted to see, and I'm sure there are people that want to see it. There's sites out there that do it so much better than me that if that is your thing, their environment's probably more controlled, and I'm going to just stick with how's it work for me. And you take it or leave it how you want, and go from there. But to me, that's what's important.
I'd also say that maybe that type of stuff was more important in the past when sensors in general were noisier at higher ISOs. You didn't have as high megapixels. You're shooting at a 16 or 20 megapixel sensor, and you couldn't really crop much at all. Again, if you're doing social media, sure.
Right.
And yes, you could, that goes into the whole rabbit hole about printing and how many pixels you really need and everything too. But I think a lot of that lab type testing and data was probably more relevant 10 years ago than it is today, when, again, technology has advanced to such a point that if you're comparing equivalent models across brands, I don't think you're going to see much, if any, real world difference in that regard.
No, I agree.
Looking at kind of more of the around the gear versus creativity in that, one of the questions we've got on here is, can focusing too much on gear actually get in the way of creative growth? I don't know. What are your thoughts? I've got thoughts on this, but what do you feel? I'm
going to say 100% yes, and my personal opinion, just because I see it. I see people saying, I can't go do this because I don't have X lens or X camera, or I only have old DSLR, or I have the Z6 that I did talk about. Maybe there's potential upgrade. If you're holding yourself back by saying, I can't do this because of my gear, very rarely, as we've sort of alluded to through most of the episode, is that really truly the case? Are you going to have to work a little? Like, take dynamic range. Old camera, new camera, good dynamic range. Older camera, not great dynamic range. You can still work around that with some exposure bracketing. So am I more efficient because I either don't have to exposure bracket, or I only have to do 2 or 3 shots instead of like 5 or 7? Yeah, but don't let that hold you back. That there's ways to, if you know where your gear might be a little weak, there's ways to work around it. So yeah, I definitely see people getting hung up on the gear and saying they can't do something because of gear, when it's like, nope, I really agree 100%. I just wanted to let you talk. I don't think I really have much else to say. I mean, an example of this would be the R5 to the R5 II, and I wrote a blog post when the R5 II was announced, and comparing specs side by side and everything. Like, there's some little benefits here and there. And actually, this was something I meant to expand on that you brought up earlier too, is the incremental steps from a Mark I to a Mark II. And is there really a reason to upgrade? My conclusion looking at the R5 and the R2 is no, there's really very little reason for most people, especially in that particular scenario, like a landscape photographer, a nature photographer like ourselves. I see zero reason to upgrade and spend that kind of money. I'd rather go out and buy a second refurbished R5, which is what I did, than upgrade to the R5 II. You're talking about such little minuscule steps in some regards. And again, technology has already advanced so far. I think it's a challenge the camera makers are going to have, is how do they release a new body and convince people to upgrade, other than the people that are just, into the, having the latest and greatest tech and this and that. But, it's really easy to get hung up on the whole, well, I can't advance my skills because of the gear, and struggling to step out of your ego and say, oh, you know what? My images aren't where I want them to be, not because of the gear, but because of, I don't want to say lack of skills like it's a negative, but just I'm not advancing my creativity to a point, and I don't have the right frame of mind to recognize that it's a lacking of my creative skills, my compositional skills, and even technical skills. Like, you may not be using the right settings consistently and things like that, versus it's much easier and you're not having to look in the mirror, so to speak, when you just blame the gear. But the gear may not be the limitation. So taking that step back out of your ego and recognizing that too. The other thing we've got kind of on that vein is there such a thing as growing into gear, or should you always be looking to just match your current level? I think that one's a little tougher to answer because it totally depends on what level you're at. Like a William Neal, who's been doing it for decades, like, if he buys to his level, unlikely he's going to see a huge advancement in his skills or abilities. Where I would think maybe this would come into more of a factor is, like, I'm primarily a nature photographer. I don't do a lot of wildlife, but if I wanted to start doing wildlife, if I was still shooting with the original Canon R mirrorless, it was 8 frames per second. It didn't have eye tracking. Well, it had eye tracking, but not for animals, I think. I can't remember now. But anyways, like, there were some limitations there that they weren't applicable to what I was shooting then and there. But if I thought I wanted to explore a different avenue, then maybe that would be a consideration for gear that I could grow into. But again, I think that's a slippery slope, because
you might think you're going to grow, but maybe you don't. Or again, it's going to, the answer to that question is going to really depend on where you personally are in your progression of skills.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good one. When you drift into that wildlife genre, it starts to, there's a little more how capable is the camera. But I still get frustrated with people saying, like, so Nikon world, the Z6 III right now has a great autofocus system, right on par with the Z8 wildlife. Like, it's fast, it's good. But then people, and it is the better wildlife photography camera. But then it's people like, oh, Z7 II can't do it. And it's like, I've shot a little bit of wildlife with the Z7 II, and yeah, it's a little slower. The AF's not quite as fast. It's still not like I can't shoot wildlife. It's like, just how far are you going to dabble into? If I was wildlife first, I have probably a better technical justification to move to those faster AF systems. But I always think it's funny on some of these forums, like, you can't shoot wildlife with a Z6 II or Z7. And it's like, there's a whole period of like 3-4 years where people did. Yep. Like, it didn't stop being able to shoot wildlife. Can the newest camera do it a little better? Yes. But like... Yeah, super frustrating.
No, I mean, when I went down the path of thinking I was going to get into wildlife and bird photography and all that, and I bought the big Tamron 150-600, that was all on my Canon 80D crop sensor, which shot at like 6 or 8 frames per second. Like, it didn't have eye auto tracking or anything like that, and they're not on my portfolio. I've actually been thinking I probably should go back and add some of that stuff, but like, I've got some really nice bird photos. I've got some other, stuff that was really nice. I did the wildlife workshop in Central Texas, and all of that was with the same setup. It was crop sensor from 2017 or whatever year it was that I got that. And was it the best? Absolutely not. Was it workable? Absolutely yes. So
exactly.
Yeah, again, there's those factors too. Another kind of topic here that I think would be interesting to touch on is professional needs versus hobbyist goals. And I don't know if you had any notes on this particular section. I know the one I called out was, again, we just touched on it, wildlife photography actually requiring more specialist tools. So not only beyond just the desire to upgrade or upgrading beyond your current skills or what you're currently shooting, but again, obviously wildlife, faster shutter speed, burst speed, eye tracking, animal tracking, all that stuff. High ISO can definitely play a factor there in terms of getting clean files. Again, I'm less inclined to really harp on high ISO performance these days, given the quality of the cleanup tools that we've got available to us now. The other one we didn't jump to, though, was the astrophotography as well, and the cleanliness of files in that regard. I would say, like, for me, the R5 is probably... That's where if I wanted to get back into Astro, I don't know that I've been terribly impressed with the R5's performance with night sky. Again, I'm sure in the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, it's fine. But I do notice there's quite a few hot pixels and stuff like that. Maybe I would want to go with a lower megapixel camera for that scenario, what have you. I'm kind of sort of inclined to say that even the R might have been a little better at that stuff than the R5. So again, what's our favorite answer to a question? It depends.
It depends.
Right. So, so there's peace there. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the professional versus hobbyist? Obviously, one, if you're trying to earn income versus you're just doing it for fun. But
my biggest one on that, all the points you said about wildlife and astro, if you're doing that at a professional level, you probably don't want to make compromises because those are difficult situations. The other one I would put in there, and really more and more cameras are weatherproof, weather resistant, but I feel like a professional, we like those terrible conditions. We're more likely to agree that those are the conditions to probably be out in, higher chances of getting something that people don't see as often. And that's where I think it's advantage. Even leading a workshop, if it's raining, I don't have to care about my camera as much because I can just be there while I get distracted and I'm helping someone. If my camera is getting wet, it's probably going to survive it. Whereas a hobbyist, I think you and I have talked before, you and I have both shot with cameras that aren't said to be weather resistant and are actually pretty robust. But that's just one of those small things. If you're professional, I think some of that the weather sealing, even from dust, like think Death Valley, blowing dust and just being sealed against that. Because we're out more than a handful of times a year, we're out a lot, or out in a lot more precarious situations, we're looking for those sands, we're looking for those blowing dusts because it makes the dunes look cool. I could see there's a case where the professional level of gear fits well with that, whereas a hobbyist, you might be able to take more steps to protect it, or it's not happening as often, so therefore, okay, it got a little damp this one time, it's going to be okay, versus you or I, who might go for a week and have it out every day in the rain. I can see a case, that is a case where I think if you're doing this professionally, the tools, there's more justification to have that level of thing when it might not be make or break for a hobby.
That's a good point. And even just the durability and ruggedness of the cameras too. Like you look at Canon's, what are they? I guess it's the R1 is the equivalent of the 1DX series before mirrorless. Like those are also a little beefier and better able to handle shocks and drops and things like that. So,
another good.
You can be careful with your gear too. So again, it just depends on the environment you're in and what your needs are. But yeah, the weather sealing is a great point. And yeah, we talked about it in the What's in Our Bag episode again. Still don't want to rehash that too much, but also a lot of what we've talked about has been around the camera side. But again, with the lenses, if you haven't listened to that episode, something to consider there is if you are planning or wanting to shoot in rainy conditions or dusty conditions, your cheaper lenses that aren't weather sealed, especially those barrel lenses that extend and retract. Without the weather sealing, you do run the risk of sucking in water or dust. And then you've got things on the internal elements that could really potentially cause you a problem where you've got to send it out for cleaning or whatever and spend the money there. So definitely, that kind of stuff is a factor. And I think, again, to your point and what we discussed in episode 2, your bodies that aren't necessarily rated as high for weather sealing, like they'll probably still be okay with a little bit of weather. Shutter nonsense does not make any guarantees or promises. It's not liable for such
got a disclaimer that we're not liable for that.
But yeah, to me, it's the lenses I would be more worried about these days than anything. But yes, worry about both, but lenses probably more so. Any other thoughts on professional versus hobbyist? I mean, to me, it's if you're a professional and you want to print really big, then more megapixels will help. We haven't talked much about medium format, but medium format's got some benefits and some drawbacks. I guess we can touch on that real quickly. Medium format, you've got shallower depths of field because of the larger sensors. You've got cleaner files because they perform much better with higher ISOs. You've got giant megapixel counts on some of these, up to 100 megapixels and whatnot. Or if you're wanting to print really, really big, then maybe you're having to do less work in post. I think for 90% of the people out there, though, going to medium format's really probably not worth it. Although part of me is kind of like, ooh, that does sound kind of nice. But I really don't think that I'm susceptible to the FOMO as well, I guess. But I think printing, specialized use cases, weather, like those would probably be the things where maybe a professional has more justification for spending a little bit more for a higher end lens or body or what have you than just a hobbyist would. Yep. And again, if you're a hobbyist and you want to delve into that stuff, and that's where the line is so blurry with photography, is you got hobbyists out there that are doing better work than somebody making a living off of photography. So it's all, it depends. But there's factors to consider there too. So let's kind of, as we wind down on this, I think there's a couple interesting questions here. Actually, the last two I think are really good. I think you and I both have some pretty established thoughts on this first one, but are mirrorless systems actually game-changing or just the latest evolution? So I'll toss that to you first, and then I can interject anything that maybe you don't touch on. Or if we happen to disagree, but I don't think we do.
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure where you're going to fall on this one. I think they're sort of game-changing. There's a couple things. I don't have to calibrate my lenses anymore for focus.
I forgot about that.
As all get out for me on DSLR stuff. I got into that world, talking about charts and stuff.
Front
and I
focus,
had this stupid little thing you'd set up. Oh my gosh!
Yep.
And I'll tell you, so that to me was just not having to worry as much about that was amazing. And I really like the what you see is what you get that does it really well. I know some of the DSLRs I think could emulate that and do that, later models like that. But the what you see, what you get, in that live histogram right there. Not all the DSLR models had that, whereas the mirrorless ones will have that. All of that to me just made life so much easier. those are the two things that leap to mind. I'm sure there's more, but I do feel like theoretically you get a size weight advantage of mirrorless, though Nikon is messing that up. But theoretically you have that too, because you get such a powerful camera. I mean, if you take my Z7 II compared to like a D750 size, it's not a huge difference, but it's enough that, hey, when you're packing stuff, and for a landscape photographer, lugging that stuff through the trails and stuff, it starts to add up. So I think mirrorless was game-changing to the field with the options and the capabilities it's brought to the table, even, the dynamic range and everything like that. As a whole package, it's been game-changing. Yeah. But what do you think, Michael? I'm curious because I don't know if you agree with me.
Yeah, I tend to. I mean, it's certainly nothing like going from film to digital, where that kind of democratization of photography, where you totally eliminated all of the hurdles that come with film and developing and everything like that. But certainly, yeah, going from a DSLR mirrored system to the mirrorless, and to your point, having the EVF, the electronic viewfinder, and all that real-time data and real-time what you see, what you get, that is phenomenal. Now, the one point I will play devil's advocate is I had that on my crop sensor mirrored cameras with Canon. It was called Live View. Yeah. So you couldn't hold it up to your eye and do that. But if you were using your LCD screen, you were basically shooting mirrorless. So I would say it's game changing in terms of the convenience of it. I do think in general, aside from the Live View counter argument, I think in general it's lowered the barrier of entry to new photographers. In that, yes, what you see is what you get. And even Canon doesn't have the live highlight blinkies, but I think Nikon and Sony do, where in real time you can see if your highlights are blown out. For Canon, I got to go in and look at the file after the fact, which is kind of obnoxious. But anyways, like, you get more real-time feedback before you even press the shutter button, which makes you more efficient, lets you know what the end result's probably going to look like. Although, again, you could be shooting at 12,000 ISO and not realize through the EVF or on the screen that you're going to end up with a really noisy file or what have you. But for the most part, yeah, I think it's really lowered the barrier to entry. Maybe some could argue that it's removed part of the skill, but that doesn't remove the art and the creativity side of being a good photographer. So, it's always that, I think, and I thinking of like my own thought process over the years, like I'm probably a little guilty of it too. Like especially for somebody like me now that's trying to do this professionally, like you want to be a little protective of your bubble and like, well, I don't want more people coming in and being able to do the same kind of stuff easier because I'm the expert or I'm the professional or whatever. But that's just going to always be the reality of technology. I think segueing into the last question I've got noted on here that really raises interesting questions in terms of how far should we be wanting the technology to go is where is it going to be in the next 5 to 10 years? You look at everything that AI is capable of doing now, and you look at cell phones that have all of this computational kind of wizardry going on to overcome the technical shortcomings of a very, very small phone camera sensor and lens sharpness and things like that. And I'm pretty sure I've seen speculation that cameras are going to get to a point where it's just kind of like you hold the camera up and it does all the quote unquote thinking for you. You kind of get that already with auto modes and things like that. But I do think there's a potentially very, very slippery slope there in terms of removing too much of the human element. And yeah, I'm all for if a camera could look at a scene and determine, okay, this scene needs to be focus stacked and we need 5 frames and this is the increment between frames we need for the depth of focus or depth of field changes to capture everything in focus. I'm wording that very poorly, but hopefully you get my point. Like that'd be great because like right now, I think we've talked about like automated focus stacking. I just kind of guess on the number of frames I need. I pretty much leave the depth intervals of the focus movement at the same level because I don't know how much I need. Probably more if I was like into really macro stuff. I'd probably have to be more in tune with that. But for what I'm doing, like I don't really know how it works behind the scenes. Like I'm not the one making the sausage. I'm just pressing the button. So if I had tools like that where the camera was able to analyze the depth of the scene and LiDAR or whatever you want to say. That'd be really cool. It's more on the, once it starts making more of the creative decisions for you, that's where my gut isn't feeling so great about the possibilities that we could see there. Right. I'm curious on your thoughts on that, but I think we're at this, like, there's been a lot of complaints that professional cameras or hobbyist cameras haven't embraced a lot of the technology that we've seen on our phones. And a very valid point. I think there's things that absolutely these camera manufacturers should be looking to embrace that they haven't. Granted, there's things to consider, such as battery life, file size, that are big considerations. We already see lower battery life in general with mirrorless anyways. So do you want to throw in now AI computational stuff that's going to kill it even more, or you got to carry a bigger, heavier battery? But I do feel like in the next 5 to 10 years, just like so much in life, we're on this kind of precipice or teeter-tot with the technology in terms of how far do you embrace it before you lose the humanity of the underlying thing, whether it's writing or video or podcast that we now talked about, where you got AI doing podcast. And the same thing applies to photography. I don't want to lose the humanity of it. And we talked about that in the AI episode, but anyways, I'll shut up and let you chime in.
Yeah, I think it's tough, and I think you bring up a lot of good points. I think the big technical areas that I think camera brands have room to improve in, regardless of computational and camera functions, is just dynamic range. Can they get a sensor that's better at dynamic range? And I'm not, again, avoiding the computational aspect of, wow, doesn't it just take 2 pictures for you, blend them together in camera like phones do. So there's the sensor technology be improved. I think that's an area, a gap. Like I would rather see them focus more on dynamic range increase than megapixel. Like I'm pretty content in the 45 megapixel range of things. So that's where I'd like to see attention go to, even though everybody talks about how many megapixels can it do. The other one is focus stacking.
At this point.
Right. The focus stacking is another one. Like, can it be smarter at focus stacking? Nikon's sort of cryptic in how its focus stacking menus are. It's like you can do X number of shots at X number of slices, which is sort of what's a slice?
That's
how
like
big is a slice?
The increment thing on the Canon. Like, I don't know.
Like, what is
at least give me a distance?
Give me something there. So those are 2 areas. But then you get in the focus stacking. I guess you just turn it on, and I don't know. You could tell it to. I don't know what I'm actually looking for there. But there's probably room for improvement. But then going to where you were sort of going is, okay, so say dynamic range is limited to 14 stops or something. Like that's the technology. So then you get into the should the camera do something somewhat like an iPhone and take a couple images secretly behind the scenes and blend them together and go from there? We know the tech and capability is there. Do we want it to do that from the humanistic approach or stuff, or do we want to be the one making these conscious decisions of, does it need bracketed? How do I want to bracket? What's it do? And it's like, I don't know the answer. I feel like it just gave me the ability. I don't know. I feel like I'm almost like the old film guys who were probably like, what do you mean you don't have to develop it in the dark room? You're taking all the humanity out of it because you get an image on the back of your screen, like on a file, on a card, a memory card. So it's tough to say, but I agree with you. There's a lot of those types of decisions coming up where if we can't physically, can't adapt the hardware, make the hardware technically more capable to do similar to what we do today and start moving into the computational AI, computational process being applied in camera, that starts to, do we really want it to go that way? Well, maybe it'll free us up to be more creative because we can truly focus on the composition, I'm at the right height, the right angle, and we'll actually enjoy it because, cool, I don't have to think about even that piece anymore. But I agree, I don't know. I'm uncertain.
Yeah, even your example of exposure and, does it do the phone trickery where it's taking multiple frames without you really knowing it and it's blended in to get the dynamic range? Like, maybe that's just the next step to improve dynamic range. It kind of feels like we've been bumping around at like 14 to 15 stops of dynamic range for several model cycles now. So maybe we've kind of hit some kind of physical or just technology limitation there. So maybe to improve dynamic range further it's got to be more computational, or it might just be cheaper for the manufacturers to do it that way than, throw a bunch of money into some, super special sensor that does it differently or what have you. So I'm less inclined there. Where I get concerned is, and you kind of touched on this, is, okay, I've got a really high dynamic scene. Do I want detail everywhere? Maybe from an artistic / creative standpoint, I want crushed blacks or blown out highlights. Like an example I'll use is on Instagram with the as of early August, breaking news, the brand new reposting tool. I shared a post from Fritz Rumpf. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful, like blown out white background, totally black. It was a herring, stork, I can't remember off the top of my head now. Totally silhouetted bird, totally silhouetted tree branches. I wouldn't want the computer to decide, oh, well, no, we're not going to let you do that creative exposure because you need detail everywhere. So I think that's where, like, you still are going to have the control. Otherwise, you do remove the humanity from it and the creative artistry from it. So I think it's, again, much like other areas of AI, it's how do you implement it and how do you utilize it? It's unfortunately, I don't know that it's one of those things that, like, it's advancing so quickly that we probably, to some degree, we can't imagine what's coming our way. Like the tsunami of craziness that's headed our way. I certainly wouldn't have thought even a year ago that I'd be using an AI tool to tell an application how to build a web app for me. There's probably somebody sitting out there cursing because they're a developer, and I'm not hiring them to build a web app now or a mobile app now. So it's I do feel though that we're on this like precipice of technology can do so much, to your point, of removing barriers and letting you just focus on the creative aspect. But I think where I draw that line is if technology starts doing the creative things for us, or even suggesting I don't know that I want an AI or an algorithm telling me like, oh, well, evaluating this scene and the layout and the light, I suggest you do this for the shot. Like, I could see it again being useful from a learning aspect. But at some point, you got to take off the training wheels and say, I'm not going to let technology dictate my art, my creativity. So, anyways, we could probably talk about that for real long, but I'm also not sure that we could really get to any like endpoint in terms of where that line specifically is. But I just think we're at a slippery slope there. The other thing I'll say is, and again, maybe this is me being protectionist, because like I think of printing and we talked in the print episode about it's not that hard. You just got to learn it. But part of me likes the fact that there is a higher level of skill and knowledge involved to produce a beautiful print, as opposed to would it be nice if I could go into Lightroom and just say print and it would magically figure everything out for me and spit it out? It would, but to me, part of again, I don't know if I'm being the old man fuddy-duddy, but like part of me enjoys the fact that there's some complexity to it and some nuance and requirement to not have everything just done for me. Again, take off the training wheels or never put the training wheels on and just tough it out and learn it. So I'm feeling that way about like printing capabilities. So again, where is that line drawn from the capture side of the equation? And I realize I'm going down a rabbit hole maybe further than what we need to. But another example would be like the lens limitations. I've got the Canon RF 14 to 35 mil f4 that is known for having some softness in the corners and really, really heavy vignetting. Canon's using software to overcome some of the corner issues, but there is softness there. Would I be okay if there's computational wizardry going on in the background that analyzed the corners, said these are soft and we know what it should look like, so we're gonna clean up the edges and everything like that and make it tack sharp? I think I'd be okay with that because it's not the creative impact again. So I'm basically just saying the same thing over and over again. So I guess I should just shut up.
It's tough. Yeah. It's tough. It'll be interesting to see
how
how
the more I repeat myself, the more I should realize that there's no clear answer. So. All right. So I think unless you've got any other points to bring up, I would say we've kind of covered this topic pretty thoroughly here. So, yeah. I don't think I have anything else. This is going to be the worst outro ever.
Nope.
Do we have any new?
Gotta get your groove there.
Do we have any new Patreon member? We don't. Not since. How sad am I?
Not that you texted me
How
about.
sad am I?
I know, right?
We've got a whole week, and I can't shout
depressing.
out anybody new. But no, again, as always, join us over on the Patreon as a free or paid member. Join us in all the conversations. We're having some great conversations over there, which I'm thrilled to see.
We are.
Matt Payne. We've seen spicy Matt Payne come out of the shadows a few times recently.
Yep.
So. Yeah, I don't know. My mind is totally fried. I'm thinking about lunch at this point. So, yeah. Anything else, Jeffrey? I already asked you that, but
nope. That's
right.
it. Thanks everybody for listening.
Sorry for this horrible outro. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And until next time, take care. I'm going to get the hell off camera.